Okay, good morning. Whether you're watching live or as a recording, welcome to the Open Digital Planning Show and Tell. My name is Stephen Barnes. I'm a senior planner at Lambeth Council, and I'll be introducing today's agenda and taking your questions at the end. Over the coming hour, we'll be running through updates on our project, which is a collaboration between Lambeth, Southwark, and Buckinghamshire councils, partner councils from across England, and the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities. Development and design of the products is led by Unbox Consulting and Open Systems Labs. Slide. Alistair. If you've not heard about the project before, this slide is showing the connection, shows the connection between the products we're working on and how they interact with one another. So you can see the public facing and the sort of back of house parts of each service. The Reducing Invalid Planning Applications, or RIPA project, is developing digital services for making planning applications. And these are the ones covered in green at the top of this chart. The work here is focused on reducing the reasons for incorrect applications so they can be dealt with faster to improve the experience for residents and other applicants who use the planning system. BOPS is a project developing a digital system for processing planning applications. The design is being co-produced with planning officers like myself and others inputting to the project, and this is to streamline decision-making and open up planning data. I'll be talking a little bit more about the vision for this product later on. Although we won't be touching on updates from there today, one of our other aligned products is the Digital Site Notices service. Slide. Okay. So coming up for today, we're going to be looking at work completed over the past 4 weeks. We've got Alistair and Lam, who will be talking about improving the upload drawings process in the sort of RIPA side of the service. And then for BOPS, I'll be talking about our roadmap and the refinement work going on for that. User researchers and designers from Unboxed, Rafaela and Tom, will be talking about observing local authority planning departments and reviewing testing that's been taking place for the BOPS product. And then Freya will be giving us a demonstration of a new way of assessing planning cases. Then we have some updates just generally from across the project from Tom, who was attending local gov camp recently. On the website that's being produced from the whole project from Richard, and then some reflections on onboarding onto the project from one of our more recent joining partner councils, and David will be giving that. So I'm just going to hand over now to Alistair and Lam.
Cool, thanks, Stephen. Morning, everyone. Yeah, I'm Alistair from Open Systems Lab. And also going to be, as I said, we're going to be, Lam is going to be talking as well here, our user researcher that we're working with. And you may, regular viewers of this series will remember that obviously that our kind of big focus in this phase of the work is really improving the whole sort of journey, both for users, for applicants, but also for officers on both sides. And so lots of stuff going on to do that, some of which we spoke about last time, to do with making sure that people are having a seamless journey around paying and sending their application. Lots of stuff to do with integrating with existing back office systems. But not going to talk about that. Particularly want to talk about a very particular feature which has been a sort of, we're getting to work on now, which has been on our kind of something we've been wanting to do, basically on our kind of bucket list for a very long time, to improve how that works. And as Stephen said, it's uploading drawings and documents, which is a pretty fundamental part of the process. So if you use the services today, what you use is something like this. So basically there's some bits of this that are really good. So we've got things like it gives you guidance and example drawings in place as you use it. You can drag and drop files, which is quite a big hit, very, very popular with users, the ability to do that. File size limits have been increased to 30 megabytes compared to existing systems usually used, and that's very popular. But there's a lot about it that is much less than perfect, because you're going through them one at a time. And I will hand over to Lam on that point to go through that in a bit more detail.
Well, thanks, Alistair. So yes, over the course of the development of the LDC service, I think there are several recurring themes that we have observed while users are navigating their way through the upload document section on our current service. First and foremost, it is irritating for users when they only get to find out the types of plans and drawings that they need to upload halfway in the application. Although plans and drawings has been, mentioned on the landing page on the LDC service, but most users often find the information on the landing page a bit fake, as it doesn't specify the exact plans and drawing they will need for their products or projects, and that they would really like to have the full list of plans and drawing required for the application earlier on. And when they don't have plans in hand, when they arrive at this particular upload drawing sessions, some of the feedback we receive from our live users and tracking, we can see that they simply can't move forward, which could incur a drop off of the service at that point. As user will be away to prepare for the plans and drawings, and it makes the application process feel much longer than it needs to be, while user need to probably come back to the service multiple times in order to complete the upload document session. In other instances, our observation for other behavior with some users, for example, who might have 1 or 2 plans in hand, they sometimes will upload that plan or that 1 or 2 plans or statements they have in hand onto the upload slot that are actually meant for other plans. This will not only result in duplication of plans being uploaded to the service, but it also doesn't help user to work towards a validate application as key plans and drawings are being missed. In order to improve the upload plans and drawing session, Alistair from the OSL team has reconsidered the overall upload plans experience and come up with some new design. On that, I will pass back to Alistair to take us through some of his thinking and design process.
Cool. So now, I want to stress this is very much a work in progress. I'm going to show, before we show, it's kind of worth just taking a step back, because uploading drawings seems like quite a simple thing, right? It seems fairly straightforward. There's actually quite a lot going on here. And in order to kind of go through that, I want you to imagine an imaginary conversation between an imaginary user, an imaginary applicant, and an imaginary officer taking place. And they're talking about their various things. So I want to see a list of all the drawings that I need to submit. Okay. And the officer says, well, I want you to see that too, so they're aligned on this. This is good. Although in my view, the imaginary planning officer is being slightly passive aggressive with this statement, because I'm not a very good script writer. But there we go, they're aligned. Okay, but I also want to add additional drawings if I want to, other than just the required ones. Yeah, sounds good. Okay, still aligned. The officer's like, oh, I want you to be able to see examples of what drawings need to look like, right? So that we can, because this is a real issue, is that inexperienced users don't necessarily know what the formatting requirements, etc., that are involved in making a planning drawing are. And the user's probably fine with this as well. It's like, okay, that sounds useful. Obviously, experienced agents are pretty au fait with that stuff. But they're not going to object to being given extra guidance if it's on the side. And then the applicant said, oh, by the way, I want to be able to put more than one drawing on a single page. And this is something that the current system doesn't really allow them to do. And actually, the interesting thing is that the feedback we've got from the office is that actually they really like that as well. they like to be able to process. It's kind of easier to look at, say, sometimes existing and proposed on the same page. So again, they are united in furious agreement at this point. I want bigger than 10 megabytes. You've got it, no problem. Oh, and I want to upload multiple files at once, especially on larger applications. So this is a pain point actually with existing systems, is where they have to upload one file at a time. So this isn't such an issue right now with the smaller applications that we're doing at the moment, but it would definitely become a bigger issue as we're moving forward into a larger and larger applications. But even an LDC application can include quite a lot of drawings. So this is a thing. I feel like the officer's being a bit dismissive here, but they're on board. It's fine. They're okay with it. So again, there's no clashes here between the different conflicting interests of our users and our stakeholders. Then the officer's piping up. Oh, I don't want to have to rely on you naming your files in a standardized way, right? So this is a kind of real thing, is that it's going to be very hard to get users to correctly do that. And again, the user's probably fine with that, because that's one thing less for them to have to think about. Mind you, once I've uploaded a file, I do want to be able to see its file name so I can double check I've given you the correct one before I submit, and maybe a thumbnail too if it's a photo. I'm sure that the devs have this covered, says the officer. This conversation is going really well. And maybe we might need some kind of shared way to refer to that file later. And this is something I think that we definitely need to explore further, exactly more precisely what the needs are around this. But this is definitely going to be a thing. But it's not a conflict. So far, this conversation has gone very well. Good times. Everyone's getting on, and then suddenly the officer goes, oh, one more thing, I want it to be impossible for you to submit unless you've uploaded all the required drawings, right? This is a really, really big deal as part of this bigger aim of our work to try and reduce the number of invalid planning applications, because incorrect and missing drawings is one of the biggest reasons why applications have to be returned to applicants as invalid. But at this point, the applicant might be like, how is that going to happen? And the officer will be like, well, could you tag them or drop them into slots in some way? And the applicant might be like, this sounds like quite a lot of work. I really just want to dump my files into a thing and walk, really. I want to leave that up to you. Now, sure, you could they could have the debate here about saying, well, look, would you rather do this work now or have your application, marked invalid? But on the short term, this is a potential conflict point, right? We've got two different competing interests, and we have to find a way to square this circle. So this is we've got all of these different user stories, these user needs, but we need to find a way to square this circle. So the first thing we explored was a straightforward thing of, hey, what if we just take the existing upload thing and put them all in one page? So we've got these slots all up, but instead of seeing them one at a time, you see them all on one page, so you get a shopping list. Well, that's going to be immediately a much better user experience in terms of some of those stories, in terms of it's going to really help you see a shopping list, go away, get those drawings, and probably come back with those drawings. Okay, cool. It doesn't help with this issue of, well, what happens if I put multiple drawings on one page? Do I have to upload that twice? And that's currently what's happening with the existing service. And that begins to get really, really hairy, and it begins to get really, really laborious when this page is really, really long. So we said, right, well, maybe a next step to explore is, what if we can create a new component where, instead of individually having separate slots for all of the drawings, we have a single component, which we've called our upload multiple files component, that users can do it all in one place. So this was our first kind of mock-up idea of what this might look like. Interestingly, there are patterns out there on the web. There's no this has never been done by gov.uk for the gov.uk website patterns, but there are patterns out there on the web of various different types. What there aren't that many for is this thing. So it's okay, give them a list. And so here we've got a list that they need to fulfill, and they can upload files either singly or in bulk, and then begin to add some tags, attach them to these files, and it's taking them off lists. So we sort of built this mock-up, and we took that out and asked some test users in user interviews to try it out. Lam, back over to you.
I just want to jump in here and say we're at 15 minutes, so if you could wrap up fairly soon, it would be great.
Cool, I will try our best. Okay, yeah, so some of the findings. Before that, I just want to jump on to say a little bit background of the testing. We've conducted sprint. So instead of testing the LDC surface on its own, this sprint, we have tested both the final unit planning and permission surface as well as the LDC surface to understand a little bit on how the transitioning between the two surfaces feels like for user and how this experience actually would influence users' expectation for the LDC surface. So with that, we tested the new upload design function with 2 technical support officers this time. Overall, they prefer the new design than what is there currently, as it clearly shows them the list of documents required that they need to, on a single page. While they like to be able to see the list of required documents at a glance, they still prefer to see the list earlier on the application process, such as on the landing page. And in this instance, when we test also the final unit planning application before cross over to the LDC surface, actually both users comment that it would be really nice if they can see the full list of document required at the end of the final unit planning permission surface when they've been told this is, LDC perhaps is the certificate they will need to apply for the project. And in terms of understanding the different buttons on the page, and on the right hand side, the question mark, users don't have an issue around it. They expect that to be the help text of the plans, some guidance of the plan, which is correct. And in terms of the uploading button, that's when the confusion came in a little bit. So both users initially mistook the gray upward arrow besides each of the name of the plan as the upload place. Where indeed actually the upload section is at the below bottom of this page. And once they have their plans uploaded, it wasn't clear to them that they will need to add labels to their plan. And one user misunderstood the add label tag is actually to rename her file, which is incorrect. So on that note, I will stop. I will pass the screen back to Alistair to talk about the next steps.
So very quickly. So the next version that we're currently testing is building on that, but then making some of the changes that respond to that. So one of the things we've done here is we're trying flipping the component upside down. So the bucket sits at the very top, and instead your list is at the bottom based on this is what you still need to add. And then as you you can add multiple files through here, you can dump them all in one go, and then go through and add the labels to that as you go down. I'm not going to go all the way through those. And as you're going through adding those labels, they're being ticked off at the bottom. But that still doesn't address some of the issues that we may have around it being clear to users that adding labels is what they need to do. So as I've said, very much a work in progress. Next steps, exploring ways to make tagging feel easier and more intuitive if we can. Really test Bops, our team, are also doing some great work on what those tags should be and making sure that we're trying to together arrive at lists of tags and the names of things that make sense both to officers and also to applicants. And then obviously further testing before we go ahead and start building this component. And with apologies for running a minute or so over, I'll hand over. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Lam and Alistair. And we can just move along through the slides here. So I'm going to talk a little about the roadmap, which we touched on briefly last time. So product owners from Bucks, Lambeth and Southwark came together to set out an overall vision for the BOPS project. And we all agreed that this was to imagine a world where data and digital tools are quicker and easier to use to provide a better planning service. We've set out how we're going to get there in this living document or roadmap, which is set out our goals for the now period up until January, for the next period of where we want to be in the 12 months time from February and beyond that. And we put that together a little over a month ago now. So we've had a couple of sprints of work to reflect upon since we did that. With colleagues from Unboxed, the product owners met again last week to reflect on the roadmap and refine it so that the now column only includes the most important and achievable work to get done in the coming months to January. A clear winning priority for the product owners is producing the basic form of a lawful development certificate assessment tool. So that's something to streamline the current process of demonstrating how a decision has been made on those simpler household scale projects. And that's something that there's been a lot of momentum behind the design work for this, which Freya will be showing us a little bit later on. So clarifying our goals and objectives for the now phase has been really helpful in our sprint planning meetings. Last week, we decided that development of like a working version of this assessment tool should be the main goal for our developers to focus on in this sprint. And we've noticed that we're more able to effectively prioritize the work ahead and make our meetings a lot more efficient use of time, having this roadmap to point to and having these shared goals. This is the first time that we've set a really specific sprint goal like this in BOPS, and that's something that we're going to reflect and learn from and see how well that works over the next few weeks. We've also refined some of the objectives. So one of these was around data integrations. And while we all agree that this is really important now, we don't need to have the full answer, and we don't need to have a working product, which is something that can pull out and add data to legacy back office systems. We agreed that it's more realistic that we're going to use the next few sprints to achieve a clear strategy for this instead of the final product. And this is keeping our work achievable with the knowledge that we build through our activity over time. So like the roadmap itself, delivery of the BOPS project is not wedded to unrealistic timelines and goals, and we keep actively reviewing and maintaining an open mind to navigate around new challenges that affect our priorities. And I think I'm handing on to Tom for the next section.
On me, Stephen?
Yeah, thanks.
Hello, everyone. I'm Raffaella. I am the designer from Unboxed. And I'm going to present you something about the observation day. So this is all part of our research process. So if, Tom, you can go to the next slide. Alistair, sorry, you can go to the next slide. So the observation day, at the moment, we did 4 of them. We did the first one in Lambeth, then a couple of them in Buckinghamshire, and another one yesterday in Southwark. So basically are a moment to review things, discuss new wireframe, and also test BOPS with officer, with the real user for BOPS. So I'm going to present you the 4 different type of topic that we generally touch during observation day, depending on how the observation day is structured, and all the product owners are massively helping us, Tom and myself, to organize the day to get the most from all the meetings. So one of the key things that we do is actually reviewing the legacy system. So observing user while they complete all the key tasks with the legacy system that they currently use. The aim is to understand the behavior, frustration, positive point, and recognize patterns so they can help us and inform the design for BOPS and have a better structure across journey and design as well. We also run onboarding session I'm going to show you a very quick example, but basically it's showing and explaining the overall planning journey by using Bobs. This includes most of the time the link between PlanX and Bobs, which is not immediately clear to everyone at the first instance because are all new product, and it's nice to see how the things connect together. Bobs wireframe review. After my presentation, Tom is going to present you something about the user test, and you will see how we are proceeding across reviewing wireframe journey based on user feedback and usability test. So reviewing wireframe with actual officer in person is very useful because we can also spot the body language in terms of reviewing feature and understanding if something is definitely not clear, like the type of face that I'm doing right now is something that you rarely spot over a call because you often screen share your screen. So it's very useful to have this type of discussion also for reviewing wireframe. And then the fourth part is live and test cases. So we observe the user while they complete cases on Bobs. They can be live cases or test cases, and it's very useful to see real cases and not just test cases because eventually they already complete the same one on the legacy system, and we can see how they compare things side by side. Yes, thank you very much. So, for example, for the legacy system, this is an example of the outcome that we are getting from our observation day. So we try to understand all the positive, all the negative, and the pattern. The different color, the light gray are all notes about, general notes about the behavior. The yellow one are important notes that we need to consider, and the amber one are a pattern that we need to investigate. So, for example, the behavior of using the interface, how they click on a certain type of button, how they move across cases when they open multiple cases inside of the legacy system. So kind of how the tab approach is structured, and also the type of behavior for the user in terms of tracking their work. We realized, for example, that most of the users that we spoke to were actually having a notepad or a spreadsheet where at the end of the day they are tracking the progress of the current day, previous day, and next day. Next slide, please. Thank you. For the onboarding, this is an example. So we Tom and I, we prepared a deck that for now we did only onboarding for validation process, but we are planning to structure onboarding for all the different process. So the key things is explain the rationale of Bobs. So for example, data not document, what does it mean and why we are proceeding in this type of direction, and also identify the 3 key steps for Bobs, which is validation, assessment, and sign off. So the key thing of the onboarding, as I said earlier, is linking things together. So making the user understanding how the applicant submit an application, and then all the information are taken into Bobs. And also what are the external steps. So we are talking about service design in this scenario, not just the product. So the way that the payment is done, the way that the applicant, the agent, or the officer receive email every time something got changed. And you can see the assessment and review at the far right are in blue because it's something that we haven't yet touched for the onboarding, but we are planning to work on it as well. Next slide, please. Thank you. The wireframe review is very interesting because based on observation and user testing, we are designing new feature, or we are tweaking feature that we already have based on user feedback. So the value of having officer council on board and inside of this process is very fundamental, because we don't design something that we pass over to them and that's it. They actually inform the design. So during the observation day, we actually review wireframe with them. So when they have some doubt or when they are stuck inside of a process, we can also show them what is our current idea for improving a specific feature. So you can see, for example, now the few things that we are thinking about changing for the red line, and getting the user feedback is so valuable. Next slide, please. Live and test case is again a very good exercise to do face-to-face. So generally during an observation day, we always have some time. Well, not always, but in some scenario over the 4 sessions that we recently did, we have a couple of days where we actually test live cases. And was so useful to see again the type of pattern for the color is the same. So the light gray is just a note, the yellow is an important note, and the amber is something that we need to do further investigation. So, for example, you can see that we need to do further investigation on case-sensitive email that need to be checked, on messages, successful message or user message, just feedback provided to the user. We also need to check something about document, and it's very interesting that also Alistair presented you all the journey about document, because we are also doing something related to document in Bob's. It's such an important task for the user, so we are taking notes about the type of behavior that the type of behavior and the process that they use to review document, and based on the current process and based on what they like and they don't like and what they need, we are trying to design a better one. Or, for example, on the far right, you have user found quite difficult to draw the red line. And again, it's something that Tom is going to present you immediately after me. And that's all. Probably I'll pass over to Tom now.
Thank you very much, Raffaella. Next slide, please. So one of the main things we've been testing recently is the ways that red line boundaries are not so much how they're submitted, but how they're then reviewed by the officers who do that in the validation teams or technical support teams. There's a link to the full presentation which you can get to from here, but I'm just going to take you through some of the highlights of that. Next slide, please. So we were interested to understand how different validation officers will behave across different scenarios with the red lines. For example, where we end up with a PDF document which has the red line, so what might be a traditional location plan with the red edge on it, or where we get both a PDF and a digital red line. Now, this is kind of been designed against in the PlanX submission system to sort of limit this, but it is still possible that because people can upload anything they like, we can't really sort of tell what is in the document until we receive it. It is possible that they still get into the system. Next slide, please. So we're just going to have a look at some of the findings and proposed changes. Again, we've got links to the full findings and the full proposed design changes here if you want to have a look at those later. So one of the things we were majorly interested in is, do validators trust a PDF location plan with a red line boundary, or do they trust a digital red line boundary when they're given the choice? Which one do they sort of go to as the source of truth? And people indicated that they had a preference for PDF, largely because this is what was existing. Although they create digital red lines internally, they're always sort of a child of the PDF that is submitted in as the location plan. And so some others also felt that this was the most accurate in this form as well, which was an interesting observation. Next slide, please. So what we're proposing is, where there has been a location plan submitted, we show that alongside any digital one, so that these can be made, that both these can be considered during the validation process, and that it's not sort of missed or only picked up later. We do still want to follow our process where we have the digital red line as the dominant one. So this is the one that is used on the decision notice in this case. And so we're thinking about ways that we can help sort of reinforce that change of mindset for officers as they start to use BOPs. Next slide, please. We're also looking at different ways of supporting the drawing of a digital red line when they've only submitted PDF. So we allow this for accessibility reasons, and we give the user different controls of the notifications of changes as well. So if they're just duplicating the red line, the PDF into a digital line, we won't send a notification. If they want to make any changes, we can get the user's confirmation that they're happy for those changes. Next slide, please. And so you can see some examples of how this process works. So one on the left where there's no changes being made, that box is ticked, sorry, where there's no difference between the PDF and the digital, and then on the right where a change is needed to be confirmed. Next slide, please. And you can see these details here with the tick box. Next slide. So thinking about future thoughts that have come out of this, one of the things we've been looking at is document tags. And for example, we have just a tag for site and we don't have any tag for location at the moment. And these were kind of getting conflated and confused. And so we know there's something to be sort of solved there. And that leads me on to next slide, which is the document tag testing. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a whole range of ways of describing what's in a document, and we're going to work with a range of validation team members and officers to sort out whether sort these different names into different categories, those that they really need, those which are duplicates, those which they don't use that much, those which they just don't understand, to help us refine this list, and then we can align it between both Plan X and BOPs. Next slide. I'm going to hand over to Freya.
Thanks, Tom. Hi, everyone. I'm Freya. I'm the BOPs PO at Southwark. Next slide, please. So we've been making improvements to the assessment task list. As Stephen said, this is one of the priorities for us within the next 6 months to achieve in our BOPs roadmap. I'm just going to do some screen sharing and just show you the BOPs staging version for Southwark, just so we can look at this in action. So this is the main page for one of our cases. So in this example, it's a single story rear infill extension. And people that have watched show and tell in the past or have actually been on BOPs might remember that in the past we only had the assess recommendation, assess against legislation and submit recommendation options. So this is a brand new task that users can do here called check and assess. And we've broken it down in several different sections. So for example, the user can check the application details here. And this involves looking at the plans, and they can say, does the description match the plans? Are the plans consistent? Are the proposal details that the user answered on RIPA, are they consistent with what is shown in the plans? If I select no to any one of these options, then it leads me through to actually make a request that we can send straight through to the applicant on here. So for example, I could say, no, the plans are not consistent. I want to ask for a new plan, or I can ask for a change to the development description here. We've been updating our saving options, so I can either save and mark as complete, or I can save and come back later. So here I'll just save and mark as complete. And then once I've completed that, you can then see that this status tag here is updated to say that it's complete. So as the officer, I know that I don't need to return to that part of my assessment. We also have these 3 new options here. So we have the summary of works, where the officer can just put in some details about the development, such as the materials and the key measurements. So I fill those in here. Again, I can save and mark that as complete here, and that status tag has updated. Additional evidence is just a general state for any other evidence that a case officer might feel is important for their manager to review as part of their recommendation. And then we've included on each of these pages a statement about whether or not the information at the end of there would be made public as part of their published report. And then we have the site description task here as well, so the user can enter a bit more information about the site and about the properties around it. So all of these together, they allow case officers to add more information about the development to inform their assessment, and also to send that through to their manager. So when they're reviewing their recommendation, they have all of that information on hand, so they can make the right decision there. And then the assess against legislation that we've already looked at in previous show and tells, that's now underneath this check and assess task as well. So really exciting updates. Officers have got a much clearer steer on where they should be entering the kind of information that they're used to doing as part of their assessment. And I think I'm passing back to Tom, so I'll stop sharing my screen.
You are. Thank you very much. Alistair, I don't know if you're still able to share. Perfect.
And just a time check, Tom. We need to be wrapping up soon. Oh, we've moved on to the general. That's great. We're on time then. Sarah, I don't know if you want to read out any questions. I can read out a question that we've had, which is, what if you get a PDF and a digital red line and they're different? Inconsistencies and red lines across all app documents are surprisingly common. Who's willing to pick that up?
Yeah, I can respond to that. So that's why we're showing them side by side, and this is why there's this flow to either so where they are different and where one needs to be corrected. So what we want to do is we always need to have a correct digital red line. Where an incorrect PDF might be submitted, what we want to do is request the applicant to approve a correct digital one. So if they've already submitted a digital one, we can archive the old document because it's incorrect, it's no longer needed. If they've submitted two different and incorrect ones, we can send them a correct digital red line to confirm. And then once they've confirmed that, we can archive that document. But by keeping them together, we can always check on the status of that and then hopefully resolve any inconsistencies. We could, if we wanted to, request a replacement PDF, but we're trying to move away from that process just because of the sort of time burden of that. So as long as we can get that digital red line, that is enough for our application to be valid. And also helps reduce the sort of time and admin burdens on staff to describe, for example, in words how to draw a shape when they can actually just show them using the tool that we've currently built.
Great. There was another question here. So without standardized file names and plans, would this not put more pressure on validation and case officers? Can someone take that? And sorry, I should have camera on.
I think that might be a question on the for the first part of the presentation.
That's right. We missed it in the first part. Alistair, I see you're jumping in.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really good question. And so it's sort of like we have to have some way of recognizing, right? So at the moment, that's where we're looking at things like the tags, but it would be really good to not have to rely on the file names to be standardized, right? Because it's every time we make a hurdle like that, you're essentially guaranteeing that a large number of users, particularly inexperienced users, are going to fall at that hurdle. So, you know, if we said, oh no, your planning application is invalid, I mean, I don't even know if legally you could do this anyway, because your file names don't match the correct format, etc., etc. So what the approach that we're sort of trying to take is to try and make a kind of, essentially it to be tolerant, as tolerant as possible, to say that actually we can, as long as your file has a name and you recognize that name, we can use that file name to refer to that file, but actually both PlanX and BOPs can have other information to work from to check key salient information, like have you provided all the correct drawings and where is this drawing? So hopefully we're not tied to file names when it comes to solving some of those knotty problems. You know, I think every planning officer in the world has that story of the sort of the horror folder where you open up a folder of files and there's just 100 PDFs in there called 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 and things like that. So trying to kind of find a way to get that meaningful information, even if a user calls their file untitled 4.
So I think I can start on the general section now, if that's okay with everyone. So I'm going to talk a little bit about local GovCamp. Next slide, please. So it was great to attend this alongside, you can see Matt, Greg and myself here, who took part in a session we ran with other local authorities. And I think there was a couple of people from Lambeth there, people from DLUC and myself and some colleagues from Unboxed. Talking about our experience on the project and how both we'd delivered the product and what we would do, or I suppose the service, the open digital planning services, but also some of the challenges and learnings we'd had. And it was great to share that with a wider context of local government sort of people as well. I will hand over to, I'm not sure, but I will hand over.
It's Richard.
Hi, thanks very much. Shall I take over the presentation? Has that worked?
Yes, that's worked.
Okay, great. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the communications project over the last few weeks. We've been engaged in an extended design sprint, which was initially supposed to be 2 different design sprints, but we put them together and dealt with them in one extended design sprint, which wasn't full time and was interrupted by some absences and some illnesses. The brief for this design sprint was that we needed to attract more local authorities to open digital planning. And the scope that we identified, which we've reported back on before, was that we're going to focus on 3 different areas: the messaging, the branding, and the website. So the phases we went through, typical design thinking stages. We initially consulted some users. We were hoping to consult people who were not familiar with ODP. At that stage, we weren't actually able to get hold of people, but nonetheless, it was really useful to talk to 6 different people from local authorities and some of the developers from Unboxed about their experience with ODP. We then came up with some hypotheses based on that in order to test them, and we then rapidly came up with 2 prototypes. One was for the website and one was for the identity, for the visual design, and they were combined in one single prototype. We then tested with 8 different people from this time we were able to get hold of people who are unfamiliar with ODP. And then we have moved into the iteration phase. So we are currently refining the prototype. We've already actually done one further round of feedback, and now we are looking to get feedback from you here. So at the end of this session, I'll share a link with you to a feedback form, which will contain links to some of the assets, and we'd be really grateful if you have time over the next week to give us some feedback. So in the initial Asking the Experts, we came up with quite a lot of useful information. I'm not going to go through all of these in great detail. A lot of this I think you already know. There's a lot of difficulties for people who don't use ODP yet about the variety of systems and the relationship between those systems. It was interesting talking to people about how their councils make decisions. So the decision to move to ODP is not in the hands of planners, generally speaking. It's generally in the hands of people who are able to put forward a proposal for change. And in order to do that, they need the backing of not just of policymakers, of policyholders, but also of ICT teams. And there was different messages about that people's experiences with working with their IT teams. And you'll see there, for example, a quote saying open data is a red flag for one particular council's ICT team. There was still, even from people who are already using ODP or using BOPs, there was some confusion about what it was if they weren't directly working with it or as part of this team. The shift from thinking about separate pieces of software such as Uniform to thinking of as a whole suite of software that enhances data flow was something that some people couldn't get their head around, or only got their head around once they had a talk from one of the ODP team about agile development and how the project works. So we created some hypotheses. In short, we wanted to take people through a very quick journey. We recognized that people were poor on time when they first came across the concept of ODP. So we wanted to explain, enthuse, and then get them to act. We wanted to focus on pain points, so picking up in particular on people's pain points with the amount of administration they do, and then to focus on the flow of data in ODP. We recognised that people responded very well to compelling evidence of time and cost efficiencies, and also to the fact that other councils are already successfully using the products, and that it has Deluxe backing. And then we felt that based on what people were talking about, that we needed to outline the steps to adoption in some detail. So based on these hypotheses, we created a couple of things. Brand. So this is the logo we're going with at the moment. I'm not going to say more about this at this stage. We're asking you specifically for feedback on this and other visual elements, because this is the proposed new identity for open digital planning, and that means that it will be something that you will need to use, for example, on the templates for this slideshow, for example, and other places where we're talking about it as we move to talking about open digital planning with people. There's also some details there about the typography and the color scheme. In terms of the website, we wireframed extensively, and that actually took quite a lot of time. The most difficult thing was coming up with the content, in particular the language around simply describing what it is and trying to cater for a number of different audiences, from planners to software developers. In the testing on this, you can see the videos from the tests, so they're linked here from here, and they're all about 25 minutes long each, and you can see that we got a few greens in some areas, but also some reds. So the conclusions were that the ODP offer is appropriate, as you might expect. We know that what we're producing here is, in terms of the software, is very effective for people. However, the website prototype that we created wasn't effective in explaining that offer clearly enough. People were enthusiastic about ODP, and they were overwhelmingly very positive about the look and feel, which was considered to be smart, and not too public sector, but also not too corporate. Although the amount of DLUC branding we had on the first one was considered inappropriate, so we've reduced that. And the language level was generally good, but people are very poor on time, so they were tending to scan rather than to read, which is a problem when the offer that we have with ODP is actually quite complicated. So in terms of iteration, we decided to lead with the descriptions of the software in the new phase, because people were, in order to understand what it was, wanted to see exactly what BOPs and the other bits of software were doing. So we've promoted that. There's still a question of whether people preferred having one page that told the journey or many different pages. I think in the end, we're moving towards a hybrid model. We needed a clearer description of benefits with validation. So people liked the claims that we were making, but we don't have the figures yet about cost and time savings, and so people felt it was a bit hollow. The general claims about the benefits of collaboration were, we put those everywhere, and people didn't really understand what they were until we started talking about the commitments. So we decided to describe the benefits of collaboration as part of the steps for joining. And this is a picture of what we consider to be the new information architecture, which is, as I say, lead with services and software, talk about the benefits, and then talk about how people adopt. So we're looking for your feedback. So I'll share this link in the Slack channel as well on this call. We'd be really grateful if you have time over the next week to look at that form and to give us feedback from your point of view, how useful you'll find the brand, any suggestions. Any suggestions on the language and anything in particular you'd like to see added to the website. We're fairly confident that the website is working in terms of information architecture for that completely cold audience, but you may also want to see other information added there. Thank you. I will stop now.
Yeah, hi. I'm David Foster. I'm the project delivery manager for Doncaster Council, and I'll very quickly just share some of our reflections of the onboarding process with you all. Next slide, please, Alistair. You move to the next slide, Alistair. Thanks. So yes, it's important to realise that the onboarding process may not be the same for everyone, and understanding how to get set up will ensure the process runs smoothly within your authority. Your primary project team will be made up of people with multiple areas expertise, such as leadership engagement, content writing, your subject matter experts and systems administrators. These skills are not necessarily exclusive to any individuals, and it entirely depends on the experience and knowledge of the people within your authority as to who will be selected for those. In some cases, you may be able to identify as little as 2 people that can successfully deliver on every function there. So your subject matter experts will have extensive knowledge in their respective fields, and that's planning, law, policy, systems integration, again, your content writing and flows. These guys are going to be heavily involved almost on a day-to-day basis in things such as user testing sessions, providing input and providing feedback that's essential to the ongoing development of the software. Your project manager is also likely to be involved on a day-to-day basis. They're going to be the main point of contact for your authority. They'll be responsible for ensuring everything runs smoothly. They need to understand the structure of your authority, so they'll need to know who to go to in what department in order to get things done and to be able to deal with any issues as they arise. And in most cases, they'll need to be a good communicator and experienced in dealing with your authority's leadership. Next slide, please. Again, other than the day-to-day involvement of some staff, you need to know who your other key personnel are going to be. So your GIS maintainer will have an in-depth knowledge of how your mapping systems work, the layers and polygons and how that data translates to planning services. As Richard mentioned, there's the Levelling Up Bill promotes open data sharing, and the project uses data available on digital land. So making your GIS data publicly available is a significant part of the project. Your IT or systems architects will need to be involved and will need to be on board in getting you set up. Both the Ripper and BOPS platforms run off subdomains on your authority's website. So they'll be responsible for getting those set up and providing certificates. You'll need people with technical knowledge of how the connectors work and also how to insert and extract data from your systems. And then also the GovPay administrator. So some authorities may or may not already use GovPay for other functions. It's usually a system that's administered by someone in your financial management team. But for this particular function, they will need to understand how the GovPay fee structure works and how you will be able to integrate that with your planning back office systems. And then who else you'll need to be involved? This is sort of self-explanatory. Your procurement and legal teams will want to review any sort of contractual terms before you agree to anything, and also ensure that you're complying with any local procedure rules. Your information governance team will be heavily involved. They'll want to know all about the personal data that's being stored, and you'll need to understand how that data flows between internal and external systems in order to be able to explain that to them. And then your web or your communications team will need to be involved for things such as adding content on your website, adding links to the new systems, and also configuring analytics. There is a link to the more detailed description of the skills and people that are required, and we'll add that somewhere as well. And then finally, I think it's really important to understand the agile methodology that's being used. So there's two sort of main applications that are used as part of the project. Slack acts as a forum for the project, really, opens up lines of communications with colleagues in other local planning authorities within DLUC and at the software developers. It's a great place for anybody to pose any questions that other people may be able to answer. And then Trello, it's a task planning application. If you're not already familiar with that, allows you to manage your workflows. When you begin the onboarding process, you're sort of given a list of tasks that need completing to be able to get set up, and there's some guidance on there. However, it's not sort of hard and fast guidance, and it's important to understand that depending on the setup of your organisation, the more detailed aspects of that will depend on how your systems work. But again, more importantly, understanding the agile methodology is essential to setting early expectations on what you would like to achieve from the project. So if it's not something that you're familiar with, whereas the traditional waterfall method focuses on a linear approach to a project, and you've got sequences to complete and you've got a clearly defined end goal, the agile method is slightly different to that. It's more flexible, evolves through the life cycle of the project, and the focuses can shift depending on user requirements as you progress. And it's also important to understand that involvement in the project is for the long term, and it's not just for a set period of time at first. So while you may be able to commit resources quite a lot throughout the first year, you may want to be able to increase or decrease your participation depending on how the project progresses, and obviously the resources that you have available within your authority. Thank you.
Thank you, David, and thanks to everybody who's contributed today, including in the Q&A. If we can just move along to the final slide there, because that is everything from us. Thank you for joining us today. The next show and tell will be on Wednesday, the 9th of November, the same time of 10 a.m. We hope you can join us then. We've got contact details here if you want to ask any more questions or reach out to one of the partner councils. So the slides will be available after this broadcast as well. So otherwise, thanks again for your time, and we hope to see you again to find out more in our next show and tell.
Thanks, everybody.